This is a video essay about Jungian psychology. Well, I guess it's really about Neo-Jungian psychology, and in order to explain some of the concepts, I'm going to use a Ninja Turtles comic. So spoiler alert for The Last Ronin.
Halt. Suspect located. Residential complex 661. Requesting air support. Proceed with caution. Halt.
They're fast. Packing more than swords, too. Close quarters combat's a mistake. I'll just end up painting myself into a corner.
Halt.
Remember the basic training. To be a true warrior, one must know when to crouch, when to leap, when to stand firm, and most importantly, when to fly.
What makes a warrior? Is it the way he swings his sword or the mindset behind the action? What is the role of the warrior as an archetype in the psychology of men? And perhaps most importantly, how can you become a warrior? History is filled with legends of warriors waging wars and slaying monsters, but one story that I think really captures the essence of warriorhood is The Last Ronin by Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird. The Last Ronin is a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic which follows the revenge story of the last surviving Ninja Turtle. Compared to a lot of other TMNT media, it's quite heavy, dark even, filled with mature themes of loss and rebirth, perhaps the perfect context for a story about a warrior.
The comic opens with our lone Ninja Turtle adventuring into a dystopian future New York City. He fights his way through hordes of cyborg policemen on what appears to be a quest for revenge. The target, Oroku Hiroto, the tyrannical grandson of the well-known Shredder. As the new leader of New York City, Hiroto sits up in his tower, oppressing the people. During the attack, he chooses to avoid direct confrontation with the turtle and instead sends out his army of robots. Neither the identity of the turtle or his motivations are made clear at this point, but one thing that is very obvious is his deep, intense rage.
Rage is a very curious emotion. When it goes unchecked, it can get us into a lot of trouble, which is perhaps why a lot of us just choose to avoid it completely. But anger, I think, serves a very important part in our psychology. Anger motivates action. It's what inspires us to perform the game-winning kick, or encourages us to go out in the street to march against injustice. And I think by beginning to understand anger, we can begin our discussion about the archetype of the warrior. The warrior archetype is probably best defined in the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, which was written by the psychologist Robert Moore in collaboration with Douglas Gillette. Moore and Gillette were leaders of what's called the mythopoetic men's movement, which was pretty popular around in the 70s and 80s. For both of them, their work was largely inspired by the psychologist Carl Jung. The book, which I will call KWML, is about leveraging archetypes from history and myth to flesh out a model of healthy male psychology. An archetype is a sort of pattern, one that's common across cultures, and is used to describe fundamental human experiences, or at the very least, describe reoccurring characters and motifs that we find in our stories. The king is the archetype of leadership. The magician is about knowledge. The lover is about emotional expression. And finally, the warrior, the subject of our discussion today, is an archetype about harnessing our anger, harnessing our courage in favor of decisive action and self-mastery. Each archetype plays a role in what it means to be a healthy, integrated man. The king, if he fails to incorporate the warrior, might find himself a weakling, unable to protect the people that he serves. If the warrior fails to integrate the lover, he might find himself to be a sadist, failing to aim his sword at the right targets, perhaps even attacking innocents. While we all have particular inclinations towards certain archetypes, some of them come a bit more natural to us, the whole point is that in order to be a healthy, holistic man, you must seek to integrate all of the archetypes at the same time. If you're familiar with the Ninja Turtles, you might be making the connection that each turtle seems to map on pretty cleanly to each of the four archetypes. Leonardo is obviously the leader, he's the king. Raphael is the warrior, Donatello is the magician, and Michelangelo, the party dude, is in fact the archetypical lover. But who is the Last Ronin? Who is our lone samurai haunted by his past?
Continuing his way up the tower, the Ronin finds himself facing increasing numbers of robotic enemies. One of these robots charges him. Bracing himself for the impact, the turtle uses his sword as a stopping force. However, the momentum is too fast. The charging robot pushes itself and the turtle out the window, causing a free fall down into the New York streets. This is defeat for our warrior, and using the cover of the crowd, he sneaks off into the sewers. At this point, his thoughts take a much darker tone.
Could have gone down fighting. Let those things finish me off. But that'd just be avoiding the inevitable. Knew this was a suicide mission.
As he spits up blood, he prepares for his last moments.
Need to end this now, on my terms, for my family, for honor.
Carefully, he collects each of the weapons and the colored masks of his brothers. Leo's sword, Raph's sai, Donnie's staff, and Mikey's nunchucks.
I miss my brothers so much.
Death. His family is dead and the desire to join them dominates his mind. In these dark sewers, he prepares for seppuku, the ritualistic suicide of a samurai warrior. With each item placed orderly before him, he grabs the now broken sword and puts it up to his belly. However, too much blood has already been lost. Instead of death, the turtle passes out. Fortunately, this is not his end, and he is awoken by a familiar voice. He opens his eyes to find himself in a makeshift hospital bed. Next to him stands his old friend April O'Neil. Here, the story finally reveals the identity of our Ronin, Michelangelo. There are two important concepts I need you to understand before we can fully grasp the concept of the archetypes. The first is the idea of maturing. In order to become a man, we must first be a boy. This is true biologically, but it's also true psychologically. We start off as boys and then transition into manhood. We're all very aware of what happens when boys do not complete this transition. We use terms like man-child to describe the phenomenon. Failing to become a true adult, the man may remain boyish and potent, immature, and fail to really live up to the virtues and standards that come with proper masculinity. The warrior's boyish manifestation is called the hero. Consider this archetype as sort of stepping stone in the psychological process. To be clear, I'm not at all saying that boyhood is some sort of negative thing. It's an essential part of our growth. And in fact, heroism is obviously not negative either. The authors of KWML go on to even praise it, saying that
the hero is in fact only an advanced form of boy psychology, the most advanced form, the peak actually of the masculine energies of the boy, the archetype that characterizes the best in the adolescent stage of development. Yet it is immature, and when it is carried over into adulthood as the governing archetype, it blocks men from full maturity.
The second concept I need you to understand is the idea of the shadow archetypes. This is what happens when the archetypes fail to become developed in a healthy way or fail to manifest in a healthy way. For the warrior, the shadow archetypes are the sadist, who acts out in violence against those he views as weaker than themselves, or the masochist, who over-identifies with his weaknesses and often feels very impotent and unable to act in the world. The hero has the corresponding negative archetypes of the bully and the coward. We can visualize these concepts with some triangles. At the top of the triangle, we have the hero and the warrior, the healthy manifestations of the archetypes. At the bottom of the triangles, we have a bipolar spectrum between the active shadow and the passive negative shadows. It's emphasized several times throughout KWML that fear is often the driving motivator of the shadows. For the warrior especially, the sadist might be a result of fearing your own weakness or fearing how other people will act against you. But it is fear that one must overcome if they want to become the mature warrior. To quote Frank Herbert's Dune,
I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me, and when it has gone past, I'll turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear is gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain.
fear is perhaps why Raphael did not last long enough to become a mature warrior. A few pages after the previous reveal, we're giving an insight into April's memory of the first Ninja Turtle to fall in battle. Around 15 years ago, she was preparing dinner for her mutant friends. Before the festivities could begin, Raphael rushes into the room and frantically clears the table. Following him is Michelangelo and Donatello, carrying their injured master, the rat Splinter. They plop him up on the table and begin treatment. Raph is afraid his master won't make it, and is overwhelmed with unregulated rage. Against the command of Leonardo, he sneaks off to enact his revenge. He jumps across rooftops until finally he reaches the base of Karai, the daughter of Shredder and mother of Hiroto. Raph acts in his characteristic rashness. He rushes into battle, ultimately working his way towards Karai. Finally, he exchanges blows with the leader and enters into a grapple as they fall into the ocean. There, Raph sinks down to his watery grave. Reading this part of The Last Ronin, I can't help but notice the contrast between Raph in the past and Mikey in the present. Both are warriors in some sense, both are looking for revenge, but you'll notice that Raph is acting on impulse. He's acting on his rage in a way that has yet to become mature and structured and strategic. And I want to emphasize, Splinter is not dead. They throw him on the table and they figure it out. He goes and lives on for another day and continues the battle. But Raph dies. And arguably, he dies for no reason at all, only as a result of his impulsive emotional rage. Psychologically, Raph was stuck as the immature hero. He had yet to transition into the full mature warrior. The problem with the hero is that it is simultaneously engulfed in a sort of self-centered short-sightedness, as well as being wrapped up in fantasy. The hero imagines himself out there slaying dragons, but he hasn't yet fully become aware of the very real dragons he will face in adulthood. Raph, for example, acts out this heroic, sadistic revenge fantasy, but in doing so, he actually harmed the very people he was trying to protect. He left them with one less soldier for their war. There is a Zen samurai parable that was popularized by Joseph Campbell. It goes like,
let me tell you one story here of a samurai warrior, a Japanese warrior, who had the duty to avenge the murder of his overlord. And he actually, after some time, found and cornered the man who had murdered his overlord. And he was about to deal with him with his samurai sword when this man in the corner, in a passion of terror, spat in his face. And the samurai sheathed the sword and walked away.
I think this parable is a really great example of the difference between the fully mature warrior as well as the immature hero and his various shadow archetypes. The samurai did not want to act on petty impulses or whims. He didn't want to act purely out of rage. He wanted to act on principle, on honor, on a sense of meaning and purpose that went beyond his simple self-centered fantasies. As a true warrior, Mikey approaches his warpath with caution and discipline. Sure, he wants revenge, but he takes every step he can to minimize further loss. Mikey acts with consideration for those around him, even questioning attack plans by the new resistance. There's a moment while planning for their attack on an enemy's headquarters where Mikey vocalizes his concerns. A heated exchange happens between him and April's daughter. She says,
"And like I already said, we don't need your permission."
"This isn't about permission. This is about reality. Do you all have a death wish or what?" There's a heaviness in Mikey's reaction, because he understands the true cost of war. He sees his brothers in these resistance fighters, and he rightfully hopes they can avoid their fate. Alright, I've talked a lot about defining what makes the psychological archetype of the warrior, but I want to answer one of the most important questions I asked at the beginning, which is how do you become a warrior? The whole point of the archetypes is that there's something you're supposed to embody in order to improve your lives. Accessing the warrior archetype is usually far less dramatic than blood-soaked stories of revenge. The warrior is more fundamentally about decisive, principled action. The warrior is what gets us across the finish line when we're not feeling very brave or courageous. By embodying the warrior, perhaps we will find the courage that we need to move to a new town, or maybe we'll find the discipline that we need to work on our creative projects. An essential aspect of becoming the mature warrior is to overcome the immature, boyish hero. This is obviously much easierly said than done. Historically, especially in tribal societies, we find that most communities have some sort of masculinity adulthood ritual where the boy becomes a man. It might be something like being sent on a great hunt or experiencing a psychedelic vision quest. In our modern society, these opportunities are far less prevalent. It's very easy for a boy to become a man and not really experience maturity, just rotting away on the couch doing nothing but playing video games and gambling on apps. I think this is a big part of why gangs and radical political movements have become so popular. There's an innate desire to become a warrior, to mature. And gangs and political movements give you a sense of purpose, meaning a community, a band of brothers to wage a war with. You can see why that might be very appealing. And in fact, a lot of these groups come with their own distorted masculinity rituals. You might go through a boot camp, or perhaps you experience being jumped in, which is being beat up in order as part of an initiation process in order to join a gang. Fortunately, there are healthy alternatives for the aspiring warrior. The guiding principle, I think, is simply find challenging tasks that you can surround yourself with other mature men. This might be starting an entrepreneurial adventure, or perhaps you join a wilderness survival club, or maybe you pick up a trade apprenticeship. One of the most direct paths to becoming a warrior is obviously training in martial arts. What better way to embody warriorhood than to actually train the very essence of warriorhood? You'll notice that with these sports, not only do we get opportunities to overcome fear and build our confidence, but we also experience those masculine boy-to-man rituals. You might go from, say, a white belt to a blue belt if you're training jiu-jitsu. Regardless of what you choose, just make sure you're surrounded by other mature, healthy, masculine men. Boys need men. They need mentors. They need healthy men to model themselves after in order to become healthy themselves. My final piece of advice is simply just to remind you that the warrior archetype is at its best when integrated with the other archetypes. We want to become a warrior not just to learn to fight, but so that we can become a more holistic, healthy, masculine man. Through the process of maturing, through the integration of the other archetypes, through seeking out challenges in life, we can just become better people who are happier and healthier. So I want you to seek out challenges. I want you to seek out opportunities to overcome your fear. I want you to not churn away from a good fight. I want you to become the warrior you were always meant to be. Thank you so much for watching. I really enjoy making these videos, so please consider subscribing and let me know what you think.